Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading Chapter 8, so let's get into it. Dinners at Breakbills had a nice formal pomp about them. When one was cornered by sad, nostalgic Breakbills graduates who had peaked in college and were back reliving their glory days, sooner or later, they always got around to reminiscing about evenings in the old dining hall. It was long and narrow and shadowy and paneled in dark wood, and lined with murky oil paintings of past deans in various states of period dress. Light came from hideous lopsided silver candelabras, placed along the table every 10 feet, and the candle flames were always flaring up or snuffing out, or changing color under the influence of some stray spell or another. Everybody wore identical Breakbills uniforms. Students' names were inscribed on the table at their assigned places, which changed nightly according to, apparently, the whims of the table. That night, Plum ate her first course as usual, 2 rather uninspired crab cakes, skipping the wine as she usually did, then excused herself to go to the ladies. As Plum passed, behind her, Darcy discreetly held out the silver pencil case behind her back, and Plum pocketed it. She wasn't going to the ladies, of course. Well, she was, but only because she had to. She wouldn't be going back after. Plum walked briskly through the empty house to the senior common room, which the faculty rarely bothered to lock. So confident were they that no student would dare to cross its threshold unchaperoned. But Plum dared. The senior common room was a cavernous, silent, L-shaped chamber, lined with bookcases and littered with shiny red leather couches and chairs. It was empty, or almost. The only person there was Professor Coldwater, and she wasn't worried about him. She figured he might be there. Most of the faculty were at dinner, but according to the roster, it was his turn to eat late with the first years. He was an odd one, Professor Coldwater. Young for a professor, kept to himself. You rarely saw him outside the classroom. He was new, and opinion about him was divided as to whether he was a genius or a bit insane, or both. He had a cult following among the students. His lectures were peppered with exotic magics and demonstrations, or so the legends went. Plum had never seen one. She was way past minor mendings. The other professors didn't seem that wild about him. He was constantly getting handed the crap jobs that nobody else wanted, like eating with the first years. He didn't seem to mind, or maybe he just didn't notice. She got the impression he had something else going on, something that was part of a larger frame of reference than the challengeless yet ephemeral world of Breakbills. He was always hurrying in and out of the library with thick books under his arms, mumbling to himself like he was doing math problems in his head. That was one of the reasons she wasn't too worried about his catching her in the senior common room. Even if he did notice her, he probably wouldn't care enough to write her up. More likely, he would just kick her out. Either way, totally worth it. Right now, Professor Coldwater was at the far end of the room with his back to her. He was tall and skinny and stood bolt upright, with his weird white hair, a wine glass forgotten in his hand, staring into the fire. Plum breathed a silent prayer to whatever saint it was who watched over absent-minded professors and made sure their minds stayed absent. She cut swiftly through the right angle of the L into its shorter arm, where he couldn't see her, because it was time for the grand reveal. Toward the end of dinner, when Wharton was ready to bring out the dessert wines, he would retreat to the wine closet, which wasn't so much a closet as a room the size of a studio apartment. To his shock, he would find Plum already in possession of same, having entered it on the sly through the secret back passage from the senior common room. Fate accompli. Then She would present the League's demands, and he would capitulate to every single one of them. It was the chanciest bit of the plan, because the existence of this secret back passage was a matter of speculation, but whatever. If it didn't work, she'd find some normal, less dramatic way to corner him. She looked quickly over her shoulder. Coldwater, still out of view and or otherwise engaged, then knelt by the wainscoting. She took a deep breath. Third panel from the left. The one on the end was half a panel. Not sure whether she should count it or not. Well, she'd try it both ways. She traced a word in Old English with her finger, spelling it out in a runic alphabet, the Elder Futhark. And meanwhile, clearing her mind of everything but the taste of a really oaky Chardonnay paired with a hot buttered toast point. Lemon squeezy. She felt the locking spell release even before it happened. The panel swung outward on a set of previously invisible hinges. Annoyingly, though, the passage had been sealed. 10 feet in it ended in a brick wall, and the bricks had been bricked in such a way as to form a design that Plum recognized as an absolutely brutal hardening charm. Just a charm, yes, but a massively powerful one. Not undergraduate stuff. Some professor had bothered to put this here, and they'd spent some time on it, too. Plum pursed her lips and snorted out through her nose. Crouching down, she stepped into the passage and pulled the little door shut behind her. She snapped on a simple light spell, a friendly, glowy will-o'-the-wisp. Then she stared at the brick wall for 5 minutes, in the dimness of the little passageway, lost to the world in an analytical trance. In her mind, the pattern in the bricks floated free and hung before her all on its own, pure and abstract and shining. Mentally, she entered the pattern, inhabited it, pushed at it from the inside with cognitive fingers, feeling for any sloppy joints or subtle imbalances. There must be something. Come on, Plum. It's easier to break magic than to make it. You know this. Whoever drew this seal was smart, but was she smarter than Plum? There was something odd about the angles. The essence of a glyph like this wasn't the angles. It was the underlying topology. You could deform it a good deal and not lose the power as long as its essential geometric properties remained intact. The angles of the joins were, up to a point, arbitrary. But the funny thing about the angles of these joints was that they were funny. They were sharper than they needed to be. They were non-arbitrary. There was a pattern to them, a pattern within the pattern. 17 degrees, 3 degrees, 17 and 3. 2 of them here, 2 of them there, and only angles that appeared twice. When she saw it, she snorted again. It was a code. A moronically simple alphabetical code. 17 and 3. Q and C. Quentin Coldwater. It was a signature of sorts, a watermark, a cold watermark. Professor Coldwater had set this seal, and when she saw that, she saw it all. He'd wanted a weak spot, a back door in case he needed to undo it later. His vanity signature was the flaw in the pattern. She extracted the little knife from Wharton's pencil case and worked it into the crumbly mortar around one particular brick. She ran it all the way around the edge. Then she knocked on the brick with her knuckles. Shave and a haircut. Free and loose, it pushed out cleanly. Clunk. Deprived of that one brick and hence the integrity of its pattern, the rest of the wall gave up the ghost and fell apart. Why would he have sealed it up? And why him in particular? Everybody knew Coldwater was a wine lush. She could always ask him. He was standing out about 20 yards away. Or she could get on with what she was here for. It was chilly in the passageway, much chillier than in the cozy senior common room. The walls were unfinished boards over very old stone. Dead reckoning. It was about 100 yards from the senior common room to the back of the wine closet. but she'd only gone half that distance before she came to a door. Fortunately, unlocked and unsealed. More passage, then another door, like she was going through a series of airlocks. Weird. You could never tell what you were going to find in this place, even after living here for 4.5 years. The fifth door opened into open air. That was very odd. It was a pretty little square courtyard that she'd never seen before, maybe 20 yards on a side. Mostly grass, with one tree, a pear tree, espellated against a high stone wall. She'd always found espaliers a little creepy. It was like somebody had crucified the poor thing. Also, she was almost positive that there shouldn't have been a moon tonight. Nutso, Plum said quietly. She frowned at it. The moon looked back at her blankly, pretending not to care. She hurried across the courtyard to the next door. It opened directly onto one of the upper floors of the library. That definitely wasn't right. She was traversing some magically non-continuous space here. Contiguous space here. The Brakebills library had arranged around the interior walls of a tower that narrowed toward the top, and this must have been one of the teensy-tiny uppermost floors, which Plum had only ever glimpsed from far below, and which, to be honest, she'd always assumed were just there for show. She never thought there were any actual books up there. In fact, now she realized that these upper floors must be built to false perspective, to make the tower look taller than it was, because it was very tiny indeed, barely a balcony, like one of those tiny houses that mad kings built for their royal dwarves. She had to navigate it on her hands and knees. She felt like Alice in Wonderland, grown too big. The books looked real enough, though, their brown leather spines flaking like pastry, with letters stamped on them in gold. Some, interminable, many-volume reference work about ghosts. The other weird thing was that they weren't quite inanimate. They poked themselves out at her from the shelves, butted her as she crawled past, as if they were inviting her to open them and read, or daring her to, or begging her. A couple of them actually jabbed her in the ribs pretty hard. They must not get a lot of visitors, she thought. Probably this is like when you visit the puppies at the shelter and they all jump up and want to be petted. No, thank you. If she wished to consult them, she would be in touch via the usual channels. It was a relief to crawl through the miniature door at the far end of the balcony. It was practically a cat door, and back into a normal corridor. This was taking longer than she thought, but it wasn't too late. The main course would be half over. But there was still dessert, and she thought there was cheese tonight too. She could still make it if she hurried. This corridor was tight, almost a crawl space. In fact, it was one. As near as she could tell, she was inside one of the walls of Brakebills. On the other side was the dining hall. She could hear the warm hum of talk and the clank of heavy silverware, and she could look out through a couple of the paintings. There were peepholes in the eyes, like in old movies about haunted houses. In fact, they were just serving the main, a nice rare lamb spiked with spears of rosemary, and the sight of it made her hungry. She felt like she was 1,000,000 miles away from everyone and everything she knew. She was a ghost herself, the skeleton at the feast, the world in the walls. She already felt nostalgic, like one of those teary alums, for back when she was sitting at the table with her bland crab cakes half an hour ago, back when she knew exactly where she was. And there was Wharton, showily pouring his mingy glasses of red, totally unrepentant. The sight emboldened her. That was why she was here. She was going to get through this, for the League. Though, God, how long was it going to take? The next door opened out onto the roof. The night air was bone cold. She hadn't been up here since the time Professor Sunderland had turned them into geese, and they'd flown down to Antarctica to study at Brakebill South. It was lonely and quiet after the dining hall. She was very high up, higher than the leafless tops of all but the tallest trees. The roof was so sharply raked that she had to crawl again, and the shingles were gritty under her palms. She could see the Hudson River off in the distance, a long, sinuous, leaden squiggle. She shivered just looking at it. And for the record, no moon. It was gone. Back to its proper place. Which way? She was losing the thread. After a long, cold think, resulting in no definitive conclusions, Plum just jimmied the lock on the nearest dormer window and let herself in. She was in a student's room. Actually, if she had to, she'd guess it was Wharton's room, though she'd never seen it. "Oh my God," she said out loud. The irony. What were the odds? These spaces were beyond non-contiguous. Somebody at Brakebill's, possibly Brakebill's itself, was fucking with her. The room was messy as hell, which was somehow endearing since she thought of Wharton as a control freak. And it had a nice smell. She half suspected she had stumbled into a magical duel with Wharton himself, except no way could he pull off something like this. Maybe he had help. Maybe he was part of a shadowy anti-League committed to frustrating the goals of the League. That would actually be kind of cool. This would have been a reasonable moment to bail, exit the vehicle, and slink back to the dining hall. But no, that would mean giving up, going back, and that wasn't Plum. She went forward, always forward, never look back. Eye of the tiger. She had a job to do, a mission for the League, of which she was the goddamn chief executive officer. So, she wasn't going to fight against the dream logic. She was going to steer into the skid and see where it took her. Onward and downward. To leave by the front door, she knew instinctively, would have been to break the dream spell. So instead, she opened Wharton's closet door, somehow confident that, yes, look, there was a small door at the back of it. Turning to take a final look around, she couldn't help but notice, by the by, on his desk, a fresh box of those pencils. He'd already got replacements. Why exactly had they thought those were the only ones? He probably had truckloads of them. She opened the door in the closet and stooped through. From here on out, her travels ran entirely on dream rails. The door took her into another courtyard, but now it was daytime. The spaces were losing temporal contiguity, as well as the spatial kind. In fact, it was earlier today, because there she was, Plum herself, crossing the lightly frosted grass and passing Wharton, and there was the ice sliding. It was a strange sight, but Plum's tolerance for strange had been on the rise, low this past half hour. She watched herself leave the courtyard. She wondered whether, if she shouted and waved her arms, she would hear herself and turn around, and the timeline would be permanently busted and altered, or if this was more of a two-way mirror deal. Maybe she could tip herself off, have the shrimp fra diavolo instead of the crab cakes. She frowned. The causality of it was tangled. Though this much at least was clear. Those boots had had a good run, but it was time for them to go. On the upside, if that's what her ass looked like from behind, well, not bad. She would take it. The next door was even more temporally non-contiguous, because it put her in a different Brakebill's entirely. though at first the difference was hard to put your finger on. It was a smaller and darker and somehow denser Brakebills. The ceilings were lower, the corridors were narrower, and the air smelled like wood smoke. The light was fire and candlelight. She passed an open doorway and saw a group of girls huddled together on a huge poster bed. They wore white nightgowns and had long, straight hair and bad teeth. Plum understood what she was seeing. This was Brakebills of long ago, Revolutionary-era Brakebills, the ghost of Brakebills past. The girls looked up only briefly, and curiously, as she passed, then went back to talking. No question what they were up to. Another league, Plum said to herself. I knew there must have been one. She was still savoring the satisfaction of it when she opened the next door into a room she didn't recognize at all, until she did. She tried to back out, but the door had locked behind her. It wasn't even a room at all, but a rough, round, rock-walled cave, where a group of strangers were playing out the bloody last act of some Byzantine Renaissance tragedy. 2 boys were on the ground, face down, shivering as their precious blood turned the sand around them to dark muck. Oh, fuck, Plum whispered. Fuck, 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 fuck. She plastered herself back against the wall. She had never seen real wounds before. 5 more girls and boys were standing around in various states of shock and distress and anger. 1 girl had a gun. The others were focusing all their magical strength on a man in a gray suit. Crazy, harsh, enchanted energies streamed out of them and crackled through the air and assaulted the man, with hardly any effect other than to flap his lapels. He looked vaguely familiar, and there was something wrong with his hands. In the corner, in a heap, lay a huge woolly carcass with 1 thick, curling, knobby horn visible. Oh, God. The scene was starting to clarify itself to her, to take on a horrible meaning even over and above the obvious. That ram had to be Ember, one of the twin gods of Fillory, and the man in the suit, she didn't recognize him. She didn't, but she did. His round, pasty face had the unmistakable stamp of a Chatwin. This was some ancestor of hers, and she was in Fillory, and it was all real, all of it. But it wasn't Fillory, not like the books. It was a sick nightmare Fillory. The room flashed and flared with dangerous light. Rocks rained down on the man in the suit. The air smelled like cordite. She couldn't be here. She was going to go insane. Whatever it was that had chewed up her ancestors and spit them out had found her. It was here in this room with her. It was the room. No, she breathed. Oh, God, no. God, no. She tried the door again just because it had to open. It had to. She couldn't be here. And now it did. It had mercy on her, effortlessly, no resistance. It even opened out, but where before it had opened in. She half ran, half fell through it, and slammed it behind her, and everything was quiet again. She was in a silent room, a safe room. The familiar, homely little trapezoidal lounge where the League held its meetings. Oh, God. Oh, thank God. It was over. She was breathing hard, and she sobbed once, a dry sob. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. None of it. Or it was real, but it was over. She almost laughed. She didn't care either way as long as she was safe now. Maybe she'd fallen asleep here after the meeting last night, and it was all a dream. Whatever. This whole fucked up magical mystery tour was over. She wasn't going back, and she wasn't going forward either. She would stay in this stupid little windowless room with its crap carpet forever if necessary. She loved it. It was the most beautiful room she'd ever seen. She had teetered on the edge of the rabbit hole, windmilling her arms for balance, but in the end, she had not fallen. She had not. She had stayed in the safe sunlit world of grass and sky, and she would never leave it again. She had been so wrong ever to think about it. It had tried to take her, but she would not be taken. Plum sank down on the couch. Her knees were 2 bags of water. She forced herself to think about what it meant. Someone had found out that she was a Chatwin, or something had found out, and they, or it, was trying to scare her. Or maybe it was one of those things where you automatically saw your greatest fear or something. But what it felt like was Fillory itself had reached out and tugged lightly on the invisible thread tied to the fish hook that was lodged firmly in her back, and it had whispered, "Don't forget, you belong to me." But she had learned her lesson, or at any rate, a lesson. She would never try to enter the wine closet in anything but a straightforward and conventional fashion. The couch was so saggy and broke back that it almost swallowed her up. She stopped thinking. She looked at her reflection in the long mirror that Darcy and Chelsea had cracked last night. But she wasn't in the mirror. There was another girl there instead of her, or at least it was shaped like a girl. It was blue and naked, and its skin gave off a soft, unearthly light. Even its teeth were blue. It smiled at her. Its eyes were the same color as its skin. It hung motionless in midair, a yard above the floor, slightly smaller than life-size. The girl's outlines were strange. Sometimes she was slightly blurry, other times crisp and clear. Plum sat up. She got to her feet, but slowly, and after that, she didn't move at all, because she understood that all moving was over with. She knew who this was. It was the ghost of Breakbills. It had been the ghost all along. This wasn't a friendly ghost. It wasn't a mischievous poltergeist. This was a dead thing that hated the living. Once as a child, after a storm, Plum had seen a downed power line writhing like a lethal snake on a road, arcing over and over again on the wet asphalt, bright as a sun. This blue girl was like that. The insulation had come off the world, and Plum was facing the raw, naked current. The 2 girls stared at each other, the one who survived and the one who hadn't. It smiled wider, like they were having a tea party. "No," Plum said. "It's not me. You don't want me." But Plum was lying. She understood. The ghost did want her. It had always wanted her. She was a Chatwin, and Chatwins lived on borrowed time. Plum wondered if it would hurt. Bump! The sound came from the wall to her left. Something had run into it from the other side. A shower of plaster fell. A man's voice said something like, "Oof!" Plum looked. The ghost in the mirror didn't. Boom! The wall exploded inward, throwing chunks of wood and plaster and stone in all directions, and Plum ducked, and a man came crashing through it, covered with white dust. It was Professor Coldwater. He shook himself like a wet dog to get some of the dust off, though he still looked like he'd been hit with a sack of flour. White witchery sprayed out of both his hands like sparklers, so bright they made purple flares in her vision. When he saw what was in the mirror, he froze. "Oh," he said quietly. "Oh my God, it's you." Plum didn't think he was talking to her. Did he recognize this thing? It was almost like he knew it personally, which would be pretty weird even for him. He took a deep breath and pulled himself together. "Don't move till I tell you," he said. That was meant for Plum. She didn't move, but she didn't dare to believe that he could actually save her. All she'd done was drag him into the catastrophe, too. With an arm protecting his face, Professor Coldwater reeled back one of his long legs and kicked in the mirror. It took him 3 kicks. The first 2 times, the glass just stared and sagged. But the 3rd time, his foot went right through it. It got a little stuck when he tried to pull it out. It was a measure of how shocked she was that Plum's first thought was, I must tell Chelsea that she won't have to pay for the mirror. That didn't dispel the ghost, but it was definitely inconvenienced. It was still watching them, suspended in midair, but now it had to peer around the edge of the hole. Professor Coldwater turned his back on it. The ghost threw something at him. Plum couldn't see what, and he deflected it with one hand without looking. Then he placed his palms together. "Get down," he said. "All the way. On the floor." She got down. The air shimmered and rippled, and her hair crackled with so much static electricity it made her scalp hurt. The entire world was shot through with light. At the bottom of it was the dull bass pressure beat of the door exploding outward out of its frame. "Now get up and run," Professor Coldwater said. "Run! Go ahead, I'm right behind you." Plum ran. She could have stayed and tried to help, but that would have been compounding her stupidity with more stupidity. She did the hard thing and trusted him. She hurdled the couch like a champion and felt a shock wave as Professor Coldwater detonated some final spell. The force of it lifted Plum off her feet for a second and made her stagger, but she found them again and kept on running. Going back was faster than going forward had been. She was bounding ahead, 7-league boot style, which at first she thought was adrenaline till she realized, nope, magic. One stride took her through the hell room, another, and she was in colonial breakbills. Then she was in Wharton's room, on the roof, in the dining room crawl space, the library, hard left turn at the creepy pear tree courtyard. The passage. The sound of doors slamming shut behind her was like a string of firecrackers going off. She didn't stop till she was back in the safety of the senior common room, breathing hard. He was right behind her, just as he'd said. He'd done it. He'd gotten them out. Never had anything seemed so certain than that she was going to die in that room. But now it was over. The bad thing, the horror, had broken out of whatever it had been hiding all her life. But he'd shoved it back down, for now. Without a word, Professor Coldwater set about resealing the passageway behind them. She watched him work, her breath slowly going back to normal. Dazed, but not so dazed that she wasn't interested in the technical aspects, moving in fast motion, his arms flying crazily like a time-lapse movie. He assembled an entire intricately patterned brick wall in about 5 seconds. She wondered where he'd learned how to do that. Not here. This time, he left out the fancy signature angles. Say that for him. He learned from his mistakes. Then he climbed out and closed the door. They were alone. It could all have been a dream, except for the plaster dust on the shoulders of Professor Coldwater's blazer. "How did you know?" she said. "How did you know where I was, where the ghost was?" "Not a ghost, a Niffin. Very bad news." "What did it want?" She used to be human, and I don't know. Did she say anything to you?" "No. Can they talk?" "I don't know." One of his fingers was still crackling with a bit of white fire. He shook it, and it went out. "Nobody knows much about them. I'm not even sure I did anything to her. I just distracted her and got out of there." "But you looked surprised when you saw it. You looked like you recognized it. I mean, her." "I know." Professor Coldwater looked sadder and less triumphant than she would have thought. "I know I did. I wish she'd said something." "I don't care if it recited the goddamn King James Bible." Dean Fogg rounded the corner of the L at speed. He didn't look happy. "Do you know how many alarms you two set off, blundering around in the subspaces like that?" Professor Coldwater ticked off on his fingers silently. 11? "Yes, 11. Fogg seemed perversely unhappy that Coldwater had got the right answer. "What the hell were you doing back there, perchance?" Plum flushed. The prank. She'd completely forgotten about it. She still had Wharton's stupid pencil case in her stupid pocket. It was so utterly pointless. Maybe that's what the ghost was trying to teach her. It's all pointless. Fate is coming, whatever you do, so quit wriggling around. It's only making you look more ridiculous than you already do. We're all ghosts here. You just don't look like one yet. But she wasn't having that. If that was true, then what was the point of anything ever? She was going to wriggle a bit longer anyway. Who the hell cared how ridiculous she looked? Plum squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. I was looking for a secret passage to the wine closet, she said, loud and clear, so I could play a prank on Wharton. A prank? Fogg was unimpressed with her existential courage. I see. Coldwater? Dean Fogg. You didn't perform the incursion protocols. Any of them. No, Coldwater said. I didn't. There wasn't much time. The situation was pretty urgent. Did you at least try to terminate the damn thing, or banish it? He bit something back. No. Why not? A muscle moved in Professor Coldwater's jaw. I couldn't do that. Professor Coldwater saved my life, Plum put in. Thank you, Purchas, Fogg said. And he also put the lives of everybody else at this school at risk. I took a chance on you, Quentin, and it was a mistake. You're fired. Be out of your rooms by end of day tomorrow. Professor Liu can pick up the rest of your teaching. Coldwater didn't flinch, didn't even blink, but Plum flinched for him, the way you do when you see somebody else take a punch. All right, I understand. Do you? Fogg was so angry he was spitting. Do you? Well, you always were a quick one. I would think you, of all people, would have caught on a little quicker, given that you witnessed firsthand the reason why these protocols were created in the first place. Purchas? Yes, sir. You can finish out the last 3 weeks of the semester. Then you're expelled. Fogg glared at them both in turn, then walked out of the room. Plum so wished she could be cool about it. She didn't think she was going to cry. She just had to sit down on one of the red leather couches and put her head between her knees for a minute, while her vision grayed out around the edges. She really did love Brakebills. She loved it so much. She really did. She really had. She felt the sofa squish as Professor Coldwater sat down at the other end. He blew out a long sigh. Well, I'm so sorry, Professor Coldwater. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to put you in danger. I didn't mean to get you fired. And now she did sob. Once, twice, 3 times. They were going to turn her out into the cold, scary world. She wasn't ready. It wasn't safe. What was she going to do? How was she going to live now? I know. Please don't worry about it. He said it quietly. I've been thrown out of better places than this, and you might as well call me Quentin. But what are you going to do? What am I going to do? You'll find something. It's a big world, probably bigger than you realize. But I'm a failure. I'm a freak. I got kicked out of Brakebills, for God's sake. The words barely had any meaning. They would soon, she knew, but right now it made her lips feel numb just to say them, as if the words were envenomed. She was expelled. She thought of having to say them to her parents, and the gray came back. Something will come up, I promise you. Plenty of people have Brakebills degrees, but how many people can say they got kicked out? It's a pretty exclusive club. She wasn't so far gone that she didn't snort at that. But if you don't mind me asking, he went on, what exactly were you doing back there? I sealed that corridor off for a reason. Even I couldn't figure out where it went. Oh, I told Fogg the truth. I really was pranking Wharton. But why? Well, he's been kind of stingy with the wine lately. Plus, it just seemed to me like there should be more. I don't know. Chianti afoot around here. chicanery afoot around here. Generally, hijinks. It sounds silly now, but you know what I mean? To lighten the tone, because basically, who knows? We could all drop dead at any moment. That is true. Or get expelled. Quentin appeared to accept her reasoning at face value. Old people, you know, knew what you were going to get. You never knew what you were going to get. Do you still want to know where the secret passage is to the wine closet? Sure, Plum said, though not unshakily. She managed a bitter little laugh. Why the hell not? But she meant it. Fuck it. They could take break bills away from her, apparently, but at least the honor of the League would live on eternally. She would always have that. You want the next panel over, Quentin said. You don't count the half panel. Aha. She drew the same rune word she had before, and the door opened, and she peered inside. It was just what she thought. A cakewalk. Not even 100 yards, more like 75. After all that, the timing was pretty close to perfect. Plum had just closed the secret door to the wine closet behind her. It was concealed behind a trick wine rack. When Wharton came bustling in through the front door with the rumble and glow of the cheese course subsiding behind him. Her hair was a mess, but that was just part of the effect. It was all extremely League. Wharton froze, with a freshly recorked bottle in one hand and 2 inverted wine glasses dangling from the fingers of the other. Plum regarded him calmly. Some of the charm of Wharton's face came from its asymmetry. He'd had a hair lip corrected at some point, and the surgery had gone well, so that all that was left was a tiny tough guy scar, as if he'd taken one straight to the face at some point but kept on trucking. Also, he had an incredibly precious widow's peak. Some guys had all the luck. You've been short-pouring the fins, she said. Yes, he said. You have my pencils. Yes. It's not the pencils I mind, Wharton said, so much as the case, and the knife. They're antique silver, Smith & Sharp. You can't find those anywhere anymore. She took the case out of her pocket. She wasn't going to give an inch. Not even after everything else. Especially not. To hell with the ghost, and to hell with break bills. And to deepest, darkest hell with the Chatwins. The world had split open under her feet, and nothing would ever be the same. But she would still play her part to the hilt, to the end. They couldn't take that away. Why have you been short-pouring the fins? 'Cause I need the extra wine. God, was he really an alcoholic? Nothing should surprise her at this point, but still. He didn't seem like the type. Epifanio, maybe, but not Wharton. And Wharton wouldn't be an enabler like that. But what do you need it for? Plum held the case just out of reach. I'll give you back the pencils and all that. I just want to know. What do you think? Wharton said. I leave it out for the damn ghost. I thought the wine might keep it happy. That thing scares the shit out of me. Wharton had a lot to learn about ghosts. She sighed and sat down on a crate. All her strength was gone. Me too. She handed him the case. Wharton sat down next to her and pulled over a little table. He placed the 2 glasses on it. Wine? Thanks, Plum said. I'd love some. If not now, when? He poured properly this time, even a little heavy. The dark liquid looked black in the glass, and she had to restrain herself from gulping it. Fresh tobacco. Black currants. God, it was so good. She kept it in her mouth for a count of 10 before she swallowed. If there was any magic in this world, that was not magic. It was wine. She smelled wet hay from a tumble-down field in Tuscany in the early morning, after the sky turned light, but before the sun burned off the dew. It reminded her of somewhere else, too, a place she'd never been, or never seen, let alone smelled, someplace green and unspoiled and far away, which she knew well even though she'd never been there, just as it knew her well. She felt its pull on her as she always had, but for the moment she let its name escape her. That's it for today. We'll see you guys next week with Chapter 9.